Rogers TV, Durham Region. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Politics. I'm Debra Hutchison. Our guest this week is Durham MPP Lindsey Park. Lindsey, we haven't seen you for a while. So much has changed. Good to see your face. How have you been keeping?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on this great show, Deb.
As I mentioned, a lot has changed as we ramp up to the June 2nd provincial election. Your name will not be on it. You have chosen not to run again. Why?
Well, I released a statement in October that stands, and for those who haven't read it, they can find the full statement on my Twitter page. But all I can say further at this time, Deb, is that I'm still waiting for an apology from Paul Calandra for the false statement he released about me. It's not too late for the government House Leader to apologize. Due to the breakdown in trust that transpired with the current leadership of the Ontario PC Party in late October, I resigned from the PC caucus and have been sitting as an independent ever since. And I will add, Deb, that I do not plan to seek re-election in Durham.
And for those who are not familiar, of course, you were accused of misrepresenting your COVID-19 vaccination status. You will heartily disagree with that accusation, and that's where the breakdown in trust came from, correct?
Yeah, and it was a number of things, I would say, leading up to it. A breakdown in trust does not happen overnight, Deb, but certainly that was the final straw.
So your name will not be on the ballot June 2nd, but there will be Lindsey Park. As we have read on your Twitter, you let everybody know that there's another person running, same name as yours, as an independent.
Yeah, you have to question what games are being played, I think, Deb, but there is another Lindsey Park, spelt a bit differently, spelt A-Y instead of E-Y, that is registered as an independent to run in the Durham riding in the next election, but that is not me.
Okay. When did you decide to get involved in politics? Is this something that, had been in the back of your mind for quite a while?
Well, I wasn't raised in a political family. I was raised in a hockey family, and so we were more likely to be watching Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night than discussing politics. So it really wasn't until I decided to become a lawyer and went to law school that I started to take interest in our laws and how our laws are formed and changed over time. And I can remember one of the first years of law school, professor standing at the front of the room and saying, well, there's two ways to change the laws in our country. Either you can be a lawyer, and if you bring a case to the Supreme Court, you might change an aspect of the laws, or you can be involved in politics and involved in changing laws every day. And so I reflect on that and thought, that this politics thing sounds interesting. Maybe I should volunteer and see what it's all about. And that's how it started. And I think my interest in it grew over time from then.
Very unusual for someone that runs for a provincial seat the first time to actually become elected. It has been a real wild roller coaster of a ride the last 4 years for you, hasn't it?
It has. And, I reflect back on it, Deb, and you have to understand when you enter politics that there is a personal cost that comes with serving the community. And you don't know what all the costs are going to be when you enter, but the only motive that makes it worthwhile is the greater good of the community. And that's what I've remained focused on. it's why I have tried to never take a day in elected life for granted, seeing each day as a new opportunity to do something to better our community. And you never know how long you're going to serve for. There are many reasons why some members' terms come up short and others get a lot longer than they expected, being reelected many, many times. But I will say this, when I joined the Ontario PC party, I never expected it would lead to the leadership of the party releasing a false statement about me a week before my wedding. They say in politics, you can go from high to low in a day. Well, I experienced one of the worst days of my life and the best day of my life all in the same week. And I also never imagined my personal medical history would be used against me in this way. And so, as I said, you never know what the cost will be.
Perhaps what are some of the lessons that you learned throughout this last 4 years, your times in politics, that you will stay with you forever?
Well, one thing, and it was one of the reasons why I decided to put out my full statement on what actually happened around this accusation that the government House leader made about me. But we do really have an incredible people living all across our province who, you know, they can tell what's going on. They can tell when something doesn't quite add up, and you really have to trust that the people that live in Ontario want the best for Ontario. And that means being transparent. That means being accountable. That means putting the facts out there. And it doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you, but it means being transparent and trusting people to come to the right conclusion. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to be very, very transparent. I put out more details about what happened than many people ever would have. Lots of people would have just denied it and moved on and never said what happened. But for me, it's always been important to trust the people I serve enough to be transparent with them and let them reach their own conclusions. And if they have follow-up questions, that's why we have an office. They can call and ask for the details. But in the information age, no matter what leadership role you are in our society, you have to be transparent and trust people with the facts.
Now, since resigning from the caucus, you have been operating as an independent. What has that experience been like?
Well, it's been a very interesting perspective of the legislature and the legislative process. Now I do all my own research to decide how to vote on each bill. No one tells me how I'm expected to vote except my constituents. And after I became an independent, I wanted to remain active in the legislature and be there to vote, ask questions in question period, and bring legislation. And so that's what I think my constituents elected me to do. And that's what I've been doing since becoming an independent.
It's been said that politics, despite the growing number of women who have entered politics and who are involved in politics, despite all that, it's still an old boys club. Would you agree?
I think that's a term that's been used a lot over the years. There's no question historically that was true. I think it's getting better, but there's still a long way to go to encourage more strong, qualified women to run for elected office, but also to include them in the behind the scenes decision making. There's no question that when we add women, when we have both men and women making decisions and a diverse group of people making decisions, we end up with better decisions for our province and decisions that are more representative of what people across the province feel and want to see from their governments. And so it's something I think all parties across the spectrum need to continue to focus on. And it's something all institutions across our society need to continue to focus on. I truly believe leadership is better when both men and women are at the table.
Your time as an independent, you of course have changed your seat as well. Where are you sitting now?
Yeah, so I now sit with some people call them the rump of the small amount of Liberals that are sitting in this legislature, as well as the independent Green member Mike Schreiner, the MPP for Guelph, and then there's a few of us who have either resigned from the PC caucus as I did, or been kicked out of the PC caucus over the last few years. There's quite a number of us, so we're all over on the opposite side of the legislature now from the government.
What's that like sitting there? The view.
Like I said, it's a very different perspective of the legislature. You also, instead of answering questions about what the government is doing, you get to come up with them and ask questions. And so I always find it interesting, what questions the different parties choose to ask and how they ask them, and how the issues change from day to day. I've just been really taking note of it. I think there are good ideas that come from all parties. And I think at times we all need to do a better job of listening to people, perhaps on the other side of things than us, or are members of a different party. I think our democracy would benefit from that.
So what is next for Lindsey Park? Aside from your marriage, congratulations.
Thank you, Deb. And yeah, that's certainly one of my focuses in my next chapter. Is I'm newly married, so focusing on that new marriage, as well as I'm going to be exploring some opportunities outside of provincial politics. So I'll share more on that when I can.
But as you said, your intention is to remain living in Durham riding.
Yes, so we plan to stay out in this area. My husband's business is in Durham Region, and so we plan to live out here and hopefully have a family out here.
Talk about a different perspective. You will be watching those who are elected like a hawk, I would imagine.
Election day will be a bit of a different experience for me this time than 4 years ago. But look, there's a lot of great people in all parties that are running for re-election. And I wish everyone who's putting their name on a ballot on June 2nd, I wish them all the best. Like I said, I really understand the cost involved in putting your name forward for elected life. And I want to thank everyone who's willing to do that for the next Parliament. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break. More of our conversation with Durham MPP Lindsey Park after this.
This program is brought to you by OHL Action Pack. Looking to see tomorrow's stars today? Follow the teams and players you want to watch. OHL Action Pack is part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the Community Billboard.
Hi, I'm Constable Darrell Rice, Durham Regional Police Service. Tune into Rogers Cable 10 to watch me on Seniors Talk with DRPS, where we'll talk about all kinds of amazing information and community programs for you, our seniors in Durham Region.
Hey, what's good, everybody? I'm Karim Grant, a former professional football player. Do you want to know what current and former professional athletes are up to these days? Catch the Players Corner with Karim Grant exclusively on Rogers TV.
and welcome back to Talk Politics. This week we are in conversation with Lindsey Park, MPP for Durham riding. As an independent, as you said, you wanted to continue to be there, to vote, to ask questions, and you have been very, very busy introducing your own private members' bill. So let's first talk about the Connected Communities Act, recently introduced by yourself, encouraging the government to develop a strategy to reduce loneliness and social isolation. Can you explain more about what you're hoping for this private members bill?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Deb. Last week, I introduced a bill in the Ontario legislature requiring the government to develop a strategy to reduce loneliness and social isolation and support Ontarians who may be struggling with loneliness and social isolation. Before the pandemic, there were signs many people in Ontario, young and old, were feeling less connected than in previous generations, seeing less friends, volunteering less time in the community, and the effect of new technologies like social media all have an impact on our productivity, health, and well-being. And the pandemic and, of course, the associated public health measures and restrictions only exacerbated this serious public health issue. And I'll note, actually, just before the pandemic, the previous chief medical officer of health, Dr. David Williams, he actually released one of his annual reports and recognized this as a serious public health issue. And he called the report Connected Communities Healthier Together. And so that title is actually where I got the title of my bill from. But I think we need to recognize the need for a strategy. It's not going to solve it. A strategy is not going to solve the issue, but it's an important start.
Okay, let's also move on to, you also tabled a motion to ensure women student athletes in Ontario deserve equal government funding. How much of an issue? I mean, you know of where you speak as a, you went to university and played hockey. You were a high level athlete. How big a discrepancy is there between what female athletes have access to in the way of funding and male athletes?
Well, there's a huge discrepancy. Historically, there's been a huge discrepancy for many reasons. But this particular issue, obviously, it's, as you said, it's personal to me. I think that's one of the reasons why it was a no-brainer for me to speak out on it. But if the government has decided that it's going to fund post-secondary sports scholarships, that was the issue, which they have decided that. They've given, over the last couple of years, a little over $5 million to the OHL, Ontario Hockey League, which is men only, to help fund scholarships for their athletes. And I think the funding, if you're giving it, which they've decided they have as a government, should be equal between men's sports and women's sports. It also should be distributed across many sports. And I will say, some would say that funding should go even further, with more funding going to women's sports than men's sports, since women's scholarships tend to be disproportionately underfunded. Women historically have not gone on to make as much money from sport as men, and so have not given as much money back to their alma mater, the university or college they came from, for scholarship funds.
Yeah, why do you think traditionally, the women's sports world has been overlooked when it comes to scholarships? Or not necessarily overlooked, but basically, there was less money available.
Well, I think some of it for sure is just long-standing differences. In school, I actually studied some of the history in my university classes, but it's historically it was taboo even for women to participate in sports. We can't forget it's only more recently that women really have en masse as children entered sports to the same degree that young boys do. The latest stats are that actually more young girls are starting to play hockey than young boys. But that's all very recent. And so that long-standing history of just there not being as many women playing means that just the governing structures in place are more built up around men's sports, and no question more men go on to play professional sports than women, and so that just means less money gets given back to the institutions for scholarships. And in the US, south of the border, we saw really a huge change in how women's university athletics was treated after Title IX came in, which required a balance between men's and women's sports at the college level.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking more recently, who's been giving us some of the greatest moments in the sports world? Well, it was the Canadian women's hockey team and the Canadian women's soccer teams. So I hear you there. For
sure. And I think we can't think of it only as about going on to professional sports. Training for the Olympics is an entire life endeavor for these athletes that choose to go that route. Usually a less lucrative endeavor, but something that's, I think, just as meaningful to us as a country and as a province. And we have to recognize, like, part of that, part of what enables people to train for the Olympics is getting supported in their sport through the university and college level. That is usually depends on what the sport, but can be that training, that development often comes before that Olympic competition.
I also want to ask you, in February, you sent an email on another subject now. In February, you sent an email to Elections Ontario expressing concerns regarding the counting of mail-in ballots. What were your concerns?
Yeah, there were some questions around mail-in ballots and how they were processed in the last federal election. I've not seen any evidence, by the way, Deb, that it affected the outcome of the election, but we are seeing a trend towards the use of more mail-in ballots in the country. And I think particularly when a new process is being used, I think it's never a bad idea to ask too many questions when it comes to protecting the integrity of our voting process. Free and fair elections are a fundamental pillar of our democracy.
And what was your response? I've seen the response, by the way, and what surprised me is that the chief elections officer said that Ontario has the shortest writ of any province in the country.
Yeah, for sure. There's lots of issues that the chief electoral officer has raised particularly during the pandemic. He did a special report on things that you might need to be aware of in a pandemic election. And one of the things, obviously, is the voting process, the length of the voting process, how accessible it is, how many people are showing up at the same time to vote. So some of his recommendations have been on, the length of the voting period. But the one thing that stood out to me in his response back was they're going to have new processes in place for the upcoming provincial election to make sure there's less of a delay in the mailing of ballots by counting the mail-in ballots at the local Elections Ontario office as opposed to at the headquarters. So just as we do in the Durham riding, the local counting takes place for people that showed up to vote at that same location. The mail-in ballots for the Durham riding will be be counted. And so that's one of the efforts they've now put in place to make sure that there isn't that delay in the mail, as it tends to be, particularly in further locations. If you live in the far north of the province, there could be some delay in the mail, getting your mail-in ballot from there to the headquarters of Elections Ontario. And so that's one of the things they're putting in place to make sure ballots don't get lost in the mail.
Right. Also, we've only got about another 2 minutes left. Just very quickly, another thing that you had really pushed for throughout your time here in office has been the Bowmanville Hospital expansion. Where are we at?
Yeah, Deb, well, I'm thrilled in my term. In early 2021, we were able to provide a $2.5 million planning grant for the project that the Ministry of Health has now approved to move to stage 2 of the planning process. So that grant really enabled the Bowmanville Hospital to do that planning to get this approval. And it was just in the past month that the Ministry of Health announced they're moving to stage 2. What that really means is that the project now has been broadly scoped, and our local healthcare leaders can now start mapping out all the specific services to be provided at the expanded hospital. You know, things like which departments will go next to each other, that sort of thing.
And of course, Go Expansion, talk about expansion. While we're talking about expansion, Go Expansion. That has also been another project of yours, and one that has been top on your list.
Yeah, and I asked about that project for the latest on March 10th in the legislature, and the minister indicated a major announcement is coming on that project in the coming weeks. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, we only have about 40 seconds left. What's been the best thing about your time in office here?
Well, maybe I'll just use this as an opportunity. I don't know if it's the best thing, but it's one of the really good things. Was I remember, Deb, like pulling my teeth out to get the Ministry of Transportation to have a look at the tolls on the 412 and 418, mostly because it's partly the expense, but remember the same department officials were there who put the plan in place for the tolls. And so it took some real political will to change that mindset. It took a lot of pushing, but I'm thrilled. April 5th, the tolls are coming off, and I hope never to ever return.
Okay, and on that, Lindsey Park, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our viewers for joining us. Until next time, I'm Debra Hutchison. Stay safe, everyone.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Anything at all. He's that strong.
Joe Schuster, will you stop it or you'll miss your train? Now help me find number 5.
Strong, but by day he's a mild-mannered reporter. Glasses, a secret identity.
Honestly, you Canadian kids.
He'd be in this cape.
A what?
A cape, wearing these blue tights.
A hero in tights, really. Here it is.
Listen, Lois, this guy is faster than anything, I swear.
If you're not fast, you're gonna miss your train.
That's it. A bullet. He's faster. No, he's faster than a speeding bullet.
Come on, get on it. No one's gonna read a comic strip about a strong man in tights, Joe. It'll never fly.
Fly, no. But he can leap over tall buildings. Oh, wow, yeah.
See what your cousin Frank says in Toronto.
Wait, Lois. I've got something for you. Here, take it. It's a gift. You never know. It might be worth something someday. Is he great or what? Bye-bye, Lois.
Your mouth can do a lot of amazing things.